congratulations for those who have survived the bombardment for past 4 weeks. It is time to reap some very nice results. At least in these first 6 lectures, now last 6 lectures. So we will see some extremely good results on surfaces. Okay, so I think you people have got these slides also. You can peruse it later on also. So broadly, I can classify the results for these past the present 6 lectures as Gauss remarkable theorem and then Gauss-Bonnet theorem. The first one, Gauss remarkable theorem, because many things have been already prepared, will take less time. But on the other hand, Gauss-Bonnet theorem will take a little more time, maybe 4 lectures for that. And on the way, we will see a lot of interesting things about the differential geometry, differential topology, and just topology also of surfaces. So with these words, let me begin with recalling a few definitions and notations. Mostly I will be following the notation in the book. The book means Presley's book that you have been following. But sometimes when the notations are not convenient or I think it is inappropriate, I have used a different notation, that's all. So let us begin with the notation sigma UV denotes a surface patch. Remember what is the meaning of surface patch? So this will be a function defined on some rectangle or a disk inside R2 into R3 with a certain property, namely it is an injective mapping and its derivative at each point is also injective. In other words, the two partial derivatives are independent at each point. So such a thing is called a surface patch for us. Okay, so we are more emphasizing on the parameterization sigma rather than just the image of this sigma. Finally, the geometric object is the image. So in order to study that, we have used a parameterization here. So this is one of the ways to describe a surface, just like similar thing we have done for curves, right? So here are the notations. E stands for the norm square of sigma u. Sigma u is the derivative of sigma with respect to u. U and v are variables. And that is a 3 vector inside R3, right? So take its dot product with itself. So that's the same thing as saying that the norm square. So that is E. F is sigma u dot sigma v. G is sigma v dot sigma v. So this is the notation we have been using. E, F, G are the components of the first fundamental form, right? Now here there is like different notation. This curly n stands for the normalized unit vector field for the surface given by a parameterization. Sigma u and sigma v are tangent vectors. If you take the cross product inside, because we are working inside R3, that will be perpendicular to the two tangent vectors which are independent. So it is perpendicular to the entire tangent space. Okay, which one? So cross product automatically gives you the sign of the normal loss. So this is a continuously defined normal. We are dividing by norm of this normal. So this is a normalized norm. So its norm is 1. It's a unit normal field on the surface. Okay, and then we have the notations for the second fundamental form, components of second fundamental form. L equal to the second derivative sigma uu dot n, m is sigma uv dot n, and this n is sigma vv dot n. So you see, that is why I've used a different n here. I don't want to change this n, second fundamental form notation. If I do the same n here, it will be very difficult to distinguish them, at least on my LaTeX. In the book, he has done it nicely with bold faces and so on. Here, it is very difficult to, because everything is in this slide, everything is look like a bold face. So that is why I've used the curly n for the normal, so which is very easy to remember. Okay. Then this e du square plus twice f du dv plus g dv square. This is the first fundamental form. This is second fundamental form. Standard way of writing them in the classical setup. Okay. So in the modern setup, you think of this as a 2 by 2 matrix or a 2 form. Okay. So it is a 2 form. Both of them are 2 forms. This is the first fundamental form, this is second fundamental form. Okay. So I will use the notation W, this curly W, just like in your book. For the Weingarten map, kappa 1, kappa 2 denote the two principal curvatures, which are nothing but the eigenvalues of this W. Okay. So eigenvalues of the Weingarten map is called the principal curvatures. Then the Gaussian curvature is defined as the product of these two eigenvalues, kappa 1, kappa 2. It is given by some other formula here also. I am just recalling all this. It's actually the determinant of this W when you think of W as a 2 by 2 matrix. It is also equal to ln minus m square divided by Eg minus f square. So this formula involves both the second fundamental form and the first fundamental form. It is just, this is the last thing, this is the definition you may say, it's just the product of the two eigenvalues. Okay. If you expand determinant, write it as a 2 by 2, write it as a quadratic form, a quadratic expression, then this is the coefficient of the constant term here. That's why it's okay. So if you have any doubts, you can see your book 8.1.1, corollary 8.1.3 and 8.2.3 of the book that you have been using. So I am just recalling this one. I'm not going to do any of these new things here again. Okay. Is it fine? Any confusion here so far?
Okay, sir.
It's okay, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
So we also know that if you take the cross product of the derivatives of the normal, okay, nu cross nv, that is kappa times, sorry, k times sigma u cross sigma v. Sigma u and sigma v are the tangent vectors, right? Right? And this product was in the is the actual normal, and the norm of that is maybe something different. If you have a kappa, then you get a nu cross nv, which is a unit vector. Okay, so derivative of nu and derivative of nv. So this is also equal to ln minus m square divided by Eg minus f square raised to half. So this is the norm of this entire thing here. Sigma u cross sigma v is not a unit vector. After dividing by the norm, it was a unit vector. Okay, that's n. So this formula also you have seen. So that is I am referring from chapter section 8.2. Okay. All right. Okay. So now let me begin with recalling another terminology from your book. Start with any surface, any two surfaces, S1 and S2. Take a smooth function from one surface to another surface. Okay. We say F is a local isometry. Okay. If the derivative of F, okay, see, derivative of F is a map from tangent space of S1 to the tangent space of S2. If you take the tangent space at the point P in the domain, in the codomain, you have to take the tangent space at the point Fp. So these are two linear subspaces of dimension 2. DFP is a map from between them. Okay, just a linear map. This derivative is always a linear map. If this is a local isometry, means what? This map must be norm preserving. Okay, a linear map, norm preserving, this is not actually the definition, but it is proved that whatever definitions there in the book is equivalent to this one. Okay, so that is from 6.2.2. So I am going to just use this terminology now. What is a local isometry? Local isometry means it is norm preserving. Okay, so that is enough for my purpose. There are different definitions of this one. All that I am not going to use. I am just going to use this one. So that is why I have made this as a definition of a local isometry. The local isometry is automatically a locally injective mapping, a local isomorphism, a local homeomorphism, because of the inverse function theorem. And the derivative is injective. Okay, derivative is an isomorphism. Okay, it's an isometry. So in a small neighborhood, it will induce the function itself is a 1-1 mapping, it's homeomorphism. But it need not be a 1-1 all over. Okay, all these things you know. But I'm not going to use all that. What I need is that isometry, local isometry means that it is norm preserving. Okay. All right. So now I have the big theorem here, the statement. The Gaussian curvature kappa is preserved under local isometries. You see, this looks like a very innocent theorem, but if you keep thinking about it, this is something fantastic that is happening here. Even the founder, the person who found out this result, namely the Gauss himself, he was pleasantly surprised by this result. That is why he called it remarkable, egregium in Latin. Okay, theorema egregium means a remarkable result. Okay, so roughly speaking, what it means is the curvature. This is also part of the curvature. It measures, in a unified way, what is happening to the curvature of the surface, which is the measurement of the rate of change of the normal. Okay, all that you have seen already. Curvature is independent of how the surface is embedded. You may think of same surface being embedded in a different way. Okay, you can wrap around slightly and so on. Local isometry, it just means, first of all, scaling as well as angles are preserved. Okay. If those things are preserved, the curvature is preserved. This is what the theorem says. Okay. So Gauss was only modest in calling it remarkable theorem because this one single result, has created so much of mathematics, so much of difference geometry. So it is the landmark for, the foundation stone for many, many results. The very Riemannian geometry itself, started taking shape from this result of Gauss. Okay, so let us see. So what it means. More precisely, if f from S1 to S2 is a local isometry of surfaces, then for any point P in S1, kappa P is the same thing as this kappa FP. Okay, maybe I should read it as K of FP because kappa was used for something else. In order to see this, since we have already seen that a local isometry preserves the first fundamental form, well, this is another result I am going to use. It is again I have given the references here 6.2.3. Okay, in 6th chapter, local isometry preserves. I think you should have Archana Moria must have done this result. We shall prove a slightly stronger result here, which will imply theorem egregium. Okay, so what is that we are going to prove? If S1 and S2 have the same first fundamental forms, okay, in a small neighborhood as a function, whatever, okay, same fundamental form, then they have the same Gaussian curvature. This is what we are going to prove. So I am not going to use this F map, etc. Nothing. Okay. See, why I am saying this one is stronger is there is a possibility that you have no map, no way to construct this one, but somehow you have computed the first fundamental forms. Okay. And in a small neighborhood of some point, okay, and another neighborhood of some other point on another surface, they kind of coincide, the first fundamental forms. It is possible to have such a thing, and then you can immediately say that the two surfaces have same curvature around that point. So this is the meaning of this one, and I am going to prove that. Once we have proved this, if you have a map which gives that one, automatically it will be true. Local isometries will preserve. Okay. Indeed, this is the way, it is in this form which Gauss proved it. Okay. In modern terminology, we are putting it in a local isometry and so on. All right. So outline of a proof now. Beginning with an orthonormal frame, okay, for the tangent planes of the surface, we shall establish another formula for K. We have already here two or three formulas here, right? I'm going to write another formula. More formula, the better. So kappa is determinant of this one, ln minus n square by e minus s square, and product of these two. There are three formulas here, but we are going to put another formula here. Okay, so this is the whole idea. Okay, we shall establish another formula for K and then show that this new formula of the fund is only depends upon E, F, and G. That's it. So what is that we have done this one? We have chosen a suitable orthonormal frame. From that, this will follow. Okay. So what is the net result? What is the meaning of this one? It will mean that kappa will depend upon only EFGs. It doesn't matter what sigma was. two different sigmas or two local isometric things, if they give you EFGs are, EFG are all smooth functions of the original parameterization. Okay, different parameterization may have same EFGs. Once they are same EFGs, kappa will be the same because kappa depends upon only EFGs. So this is the whole idea. Okay, from this it follows that two surface patches have the same fundamental form, then their curvature must be coincident. Okay, so this is the plan. The rest of the proof is purely computational and will be carried out in two major steps. Okay, so do you understand the plan? So we want to prove that kappa is local isometric invariant. So what we do is we just say that there is another formula for kappa which depends upon EFGs. So conclude that if they are just functions of EFGs, then they are the same. The earlier result that if they are local isometric, then they have the first fundamental form the same, will complete the result. That is the plan. Okay. So now let us look at what are these two major steps here. The first step, okay, we replace the numerator ln minus m square by some other term. Okay. The Eg minus f square is in the denominator. That is harmless because after all we want to prove everything is in terms of E, F and G. That we will keep. The numerator ln minus m square will be replaced. The replacement is not completely, completes the result. So that will be done in the second step. Okay. The first thing is, here is a statement lemma, which is now independent of all our other concerns. Okay. This is its own result. It's a formula. It can be used elsewhere also. Let A comma B be an orthonormal frame for the tangent planes of the surface patch, okay, such that this is the unit normal, right? Normal. Orthonormal frame is what? It is a norm. It is a tangent field wherein both the tangents are unit vectors and they are perpendicular to each other. Okay, so we are taking such a field here. So A cross B will be also unit vector. So this will be N will be A cross B. Okay. If you go back to the old notation, it is just sigma u cross sigma we divided by norm of sigma u cross sigma. Okay, these two should coincide automatically. Okay, put alpha equal to the first derivative au dot b and beta equal to av dot b, second derivative dot b. So we are just comparing the derivatives of a dot with b and see what it gives you. So miracle happens here. The subscripts denote partial derivatives here. This kappa is nothing but difference of alpha and beta. Is alpha again differentiated with respect to v minus beta differentiated with respect to u. Alpha itself is the au derivative with respect to u dot beta dot b. Okay. So now you take its derivative with respect to v and then subtract the beta derivative beta with respect to u from it. The denominator Eg minus f square raised to half of the denominator goes away. Okay, so it is not exactly replacing Lm minus m square. Lm minus m square divided by half Eg minus f square. Eg minus f square raised to half. That has been replaced. Okay, so that has a formula. Instead of writing like that, directly I am writing kappa equal to alpha v minus beta u divided by Eg minus x square raised to half. Okay, so this is the first step. The second step will be again expressing alpha v minus beta u in terms of E, F, and G. Okay. So let us see how this is coming. Once I have stated this, you can actually do it by yourself. It is now purely computational. Okay. Quite often, which might be the case in this particular case, just by doing some, doodling, what I mean by this one is some computation and so on, you can get surprising results. Many times, not too often, but many times, at least for great people, when they do that, they don't do doodling without any purpose. They, with some purpose, they are doing, and then they find great results like this. Okay. So let us see how this is obtained. Just by direct computation, right? Alpha v minus beta u. You start writing what it is. Alpha was, remember, a u dot b. So when you differentiate with respect to v, what happens? It will be au dot bv plus auv dot b. So that's what I am writing here. So au dot bv plus auv dot b. Similarly, beta u is auv dot b plus av dot beta bu, right? So I am taking some difference here, subtracting the second term here and the third term here and the first term here in the inner bracket, they cancel out. So what you are left with is au dot be minus av dot be. Okay. So there is nothing hidden here, just taking the differentiation with respect to v and u respectively and taking the difference. So this is the left hand side and the right hand side. Now comes some elementary ingenuity. Whenever you have a, so this you must have used already several times, a unit vector field. Okay, its derivative is perpendicular to the vector field. Similarly, when you have dot product is 0, when you differentiate, the corresponding derivative will be uv, etc. You have to take. So you will give you some formula. So all that you are doing is you are using the dot product equal to 0, which is an identity, and then differentiating it. Okay. So this is what I am going to do here. This n, which is the cross product of a and b. So it's perpendicular to both a and b, which I have expressed as n dot a equal to 0 and n dot b equal to 0. Differentiate these equations, what you get is nu dot a plus n dot au is 0. So I am taking the other term on the other side. Nu dot a is minus n dot au. Similarly, nu dot b is minus n dot b. Same thing you can rule for with respect to v also, with respect to any other variable also. Okay. So I won't keep on writing that. All that I am using is this equation being differentiated, whatever you get. Okay, so I can change these such expressions conveniently. Okay, that is what I am going to do here now in the next computation. So start with ln minus m squared divided by Eg minus f square raised to half, which is by, from formula 2, go back here. This one, ln minus m square, E minus f square raised to half. Okay, times this n is kappa times sigma u cross u, or equal to nu cross nv. Okay, if you want only this one, what it is? dot product with n again. N dot n is 1. So this will disappear, the vector will disappear. So the dot product of this one will come. So that is what I have done in here. So start with ln minus n squared eg minus x squared rest of is nu cross nv dot n. Okay. So what is a cross b dot n? This is general vector calculus now. Okay. So write n is a cross b, right? A cross b, here nu cross nb. So if you have something alpha, beta, gamma, delta are all vectors, alpha cross beta dot gamma cross delta. So you have to use this formula, which is nu dot a into nv dot b minus the other way around, nu dot b into nv dot a. So this is a general formula for converting the dot product of the cross products into difference of the products of the dot products. Okay, how they enter into scalar function here. Okay, so finally, since A similarly B is a unit vector field, again I have similar equations, AU dot P, etc. Right? So they are unit vector field. Its partial derivatives will be perpendicular to A as well as B. Therefore, what I have is, see, AU is what? It is a 3 vector. A, B, and N are a fundamental system of independent vector. So they span the entire of R3. Therefore, every vector is a scalar multiple summation, and it is just a linear combination of N, A, and B. But AU is already perpendicular to A. So there will not be any component for A. Okay. As such, AU is something times A plus something times B plus something times N, right? But that component of A is missing here because AU is perpendicular to A itself. Okay, so A component is missing here. Similarly, AV is just beta V plus U1 mu1 times eta. So I'm writing A alpha beta. You can check that this is has to be alpha and beta. I will come to that one. So BU, on the other hand, will not have the B component at all. So it's sometimes A and eta, A and N. Okay. So I have written here mu1, mu2, lambda 1, lambda 2. Sorry, lambda 1, mu1, lambda 2, mu2. But these I have written alpha and beta. We know what are these alpha and beta because we started with AU. What is AU? Okay. See what was alpha? Alpha was AU dot B. So by the very nature, this is the B component, and alpha is B component of AU. Okay. So that alpha I have written here. Okay. Similarly, AV dot B will be mu beta. So that mu beta will come here. Mu1 and mu2 I don't know. Lambda 1, lambda 2 I don't know. So they are some scalar functions. Obviously, they are of course smooth functions because everything is gotten by on a left hand side. These terms are smooth functions. These are the new functions. They are also smooth functions. Okay. Some coefficient functions, lambda 1, etc. Okay, they are smooth functions. So once you have these formulas, you have to just substitute here. AU dot BV minus AV dot BU and take the difference. On the left hand side, what happens? If you take this dot, this one, A dot B is 0, right? A dot N is 0. B dot N is 0. So what is the term that satisfies? Only N dot N will remain. N dot N is 1. Therefore, if you take AU dot BU, only it will be lambda 1 into mu2. Okay, BV here. Okay, AU dot BV, lambda 1, mu 2. Similarly, AV dot BU will be mu 1, lambda 2. And the difference. So very easy computation. But now, what are lambda 1? How do you get lambda 1? This AU dot N, the coefficient lambda 1, you have dot with N, this will become lambda 1, this will become 0. So this is A N eta U, okay, dot A. Sorry, I have written A dot AU dot N, but AU dot N I have replaced by what? NU dot A, because of this formula. See, I'm using this formula now. So I get minus sign on both sides here, but two minus signs will cancel out. So I get NU dot A into NU dot B. Similarly, NU dot B into NV dot A. Okay. When you take dot product with N here, AU dot N, only lambda 1 remains. That lambda 1 I have substituted here using this formula. Okay. So AU dot BV minus AV dot BU we have computed. What for this one? This was, remember, alpha V minus beta U. So we have come up till here. All right. So what we have proved is AU dot BV minus BU dot AV. Okay, that is what we started here. BU dot AV or at is alpha V minus beta U. Okay, because this is equal to alpha V minus beta U in the earlier statement. Okay, that is equal to now this thing, which is nothing but ln minus m square divided by Eg minus s square raised to half. Okay. See, there is this formula is there. The same thing here is ln minus m square Eg minus s square raised to half. So this is one formula. This is another formula, and this last one gives you the last this one. So this was the purpose of the first lemma there. All right. The first step is complete. Let us go to second step now. Okay. That will complete the proof of the theorema egregium. So choose now an orthonormal field obtained by applying Gram-Schmidt to the sigma u sigma v. See, that lemma was any orthonormal field. Now I am going to choose it carefully. Namely, start with sigma u sigma v. It is some independent vector field. Any set of independent vectors can be converted into orthonormal field by Gram-Schmidt process. Okay. So A is sigma u divided by norm sigma u. Similarly, B will be in terms of sigma u and sigma v. Okay. So I am writing A as A times sigma u, where A is a scalar function. B is B times sigma u plus some C times sigma v. What are these ABCs? It is very straightforward to compute what it is. First of all, I have already told you A is nothing but sigma u divided by actually norm of sigma u, which is sigma u dot sigma u raised to 1 by 2, which is nothing but e raised to 1 by 2. So you have divided by this. So sigma u inverse is e raised to minus 1 by 2. So that is A. Similarly, B is equal to E F E to the minus half divided by Eg minus f square raised to half with a negative sign. So C E raised to half into Eg minus f square raised to half. Okay, you can directly compute A and B by applying Gram-Schmidt process starting with sigma sigma v, or since I have already given you the formula, you can just verify that by plugging these values. You have just say that norm A is equal to 1, norm B is equal to 1, A dot B is 0. You verify that, automatically this will be the vector field obtained by Gram-Schmidt process. And it will be a orthonormal vector field. So sigma u, sigma v is smooth all over the surface patch. Gram-Schmidt process is a smooth process. So if you have initial data smooth, the output will be also smooth. So that is the whole idea of Gram-Schmidt. It's given by this formula. So I have put what are these? What are these A and B? They are now, you see, purely in terms of E and E, F and G. Okay. And after that, you are going to take derivatives of these functions and so on. So there is nothing else will come now, EFGs. This is the whole idea. The proof is almost over. But let us carry out the full details here now. Okay. So important thing here is that scalar functions ABC are functions of EFG. Okay. Now we should show that alpha and beta are also functions of EFG, thereby completing the proof of theorem. See, some derivatives are involved here and so on, right? So you have yet to verify that derivatives are not coming in the final picture. That's all. So first of all, your alpha is by definition AU dot B, right? But what is AU? What is A? It is A sigma U. A sigma U, I have differentiate again with respect to U and then take dot product with B. Okay. So A sigma U is AU sigma U plus A times sigma UU. And B is B sigma U plus C times sigma V. Okay. B is not differentiated. A is AU is differentiated. AU is differentiated here. AU again, A is differentiated. So A is sigma U, but A is not a constant function. You have to don't make that mistake. So you have to take the derivative of that. Okay, so there is some non-trivial thing you have to do here. Okay, so take the dot product up till here, everything's okay. See, these functions ABCs here, the coefficient functions, they are also functions. They are not scalar field. They are scalars, but they are not constant fields. Okay, so when you differentiate, you have to put those derivatives here. So expand this one. What you get? AU into B into sigma U dot sigma U. Okay, there's a dot product. AU C sigma U sigma V. Sigma U sigma V. Coefficients are now AU into C. Okay. Similarly, third coefficient to A into sigma UU into sigma U here. So coefficient is A and B. Similarly, last is AC into sigma UU dot sigma V. Okay. So now you look at sigma U is E, right? And this one is what? Sigma U sigma V, that is F, right? So you keep writing the expressions for these things. Okay. So this AB sigma UV into sigma U, this is EV. Okay. And this is AC is there sigma UV dot sigma V, it's FU minus half EV. Okay. So this is the non-trivial thing you have to you check that whatever has been written is correct. Maybe there is some half missing or somewhere here, you can check. Okay. So once you have this, alpha is now purely a function of E, F, G, okay, and its partial derivatives, A, U, B, A, U, C, and so on. Okay. Nevertheless, it only depends upon these EFGs, and ABCs already functions of EFGs, and their partial derivatives. The same thing is true for beta also. Okay, this you don't have to worry about. You know, the argument here for beta will be just starting with AV dot P. That's all. Okay. So the same holds for beta also, which we will see, which I have just as an exercise. You have to just write down that. Okay. So I have also done this one in the screen. Okay, you can carry it out. Expressions will be different. Okay, the proof is over. As I told you, you don't even read this one. The moment Gram-Schmidt process, if you say that coefficients are gone for this one, the proof is over. Okay. So this computation was extremely easy part of the entire thing. It seems that, you know, Gauss did a lot of computations, and it is more or less like laying down. The people became maniacs. They went on computing so many things. I know they started doing. If things can be found, great things can be found by computation. So why not? So people did succeed, though not so much as Gauss himself. Okay, a lot of things have been found by purely computing in the initial stages of differential geometry. Okay, so that part I will again emphasize later. Right now, let us have a simple-minded application of this theorema egregium. A map of a region of Earth. Okay, you take the usual meaning of English meaning of map now here. Okay, you will see that the word why the map is used at all. It is in the surface theory. So now we are using a map as a function, you know, a continuous function or a linear function and so on. So that word map was actually part representation of a part of the Earth. Parameterization in terms of the parameterization was presented, you know, representation or presentation on the piece of paper. The piece of paper is flat, okay, whereas the Earth is not flat; it has curvature. Okay, therefore the conclusion is you cannot have an up to the scale mapping at all. When up to the scale, in this sense, what we mean is that you cannot have a isometry, local isometry. Forget about the entire globe. A small picture, small piece of land, let us say a campus of the university. Okay. So in principle, you know, it is not possible to have a isometric one at all. So here we are not going even that one. We are allowed to have a constant scaling, constant scaling. See, suppose you change the isometry, local isometry by a constant scaling, then this argument will work for that also. The curvature doesn't change. At least, if at all, you maybe constant will appear somewhere, it will remain by constant time something. So something which is non-zero curvature will never become zero. Okay, so that is the meaning of this. Namely, you can't have an Earth surface, okay, represented by a map which is up to scale. You can see that lots of maps, you know, represented, they write not up to scale, not up to scale. They write it as a caution. There is no need to write any caution. If somebody writes up to scale, it is a wrong map. Wrong only in the sense of very, very accurate. Okay. So some approximation is possible. So they are all approximations. But when people are taking long distance journeys, like the seafarers, people navigation in the old days, they will have a problem. If they use these erroneous maps, they will land up in a completely different part of the earth. This is what was happening quite often. Well, it happened to Columbus, right? Columbus didn't have a map. He has to guess all that thing, of course. So he was the creator of the map later on. So this is the meaning of this one. You cannot have that one. So cartography becomes an interesting subject because of this one. So what to do? What is the best way to represent the earth, represent a portion of the earth? So there are many interesting ways of doing this one. The best method was found out to be give up the scaling. Don't try to make isometries, but try to make conformal mappings, which are angle preserving, and that is possible. And angle preserving is more important whenever long distances are implied than the distance preserving. Okay, even when you want to map the universe also, nowadays, I mean, astronomers, they are more interested in the angle. If the angle, it's say 0.5 degrees changes, the telescope will not be able to locate the whatever object, the planet or asteroid they want to locate. Angle accuracy is very, very important there. Okay, but it's possible. So this is the whole idea of cartography. Okay. So that's why this is the reason why cartography is an interesting subject. You may have seen that what is called as a Mercator map and stereographic projections and angle preserving, and these are the important terminologies in cartography. Okay. You have also seen Archimedes theorem, which says that a cylinder can be, flattened. The flat cylinder is flat. The area preserving map there is. Okay, so you can have a map which preserves the areas. The shape may be different. Okay, so area preserving maps are possible. Angle preserving maps are possible. If you want both of them, it may not be possible. So there are such problems here. Okay, so cartography is an interesting subject, not only theoretically, but in practice also. The next important theoretical important thing is coming out of these computations, what are called as Gauss equations and Kodayagi-Mainardi equations. Kodayagi-Mainardi you might not have seen, but I think you have already seen Gauss equations. Let me just briefly indicate them. Okay, and that will be the end of today's lecture. Okay. Yeah. The important thing here is that there are some relations between the fundamental form coefficients of the two. I mean, a first fundamental form, a second fundamental form. The point is, are there more? Are there more? And so on. You have found out some relation. You have computed something, but there may be more. But the point is, if you have found out something, and rest of them are consequences of that, that is where you can stop. So one doesn't know that. So all these questions have been settled down, but in an elementary course like this, it is not possible to give full proof of them, because first of all, it is not inside the domain of differential geometry as such. It goes to serious differential equations, finally, solving serious differential equations, okay? But it has been done. So there are such kind of things. Suppose you are just given functions E, F, G and L, M, N satisfy a few equations. A few has to be determined beforehand. Once you do that, what you get is a surface representing these things, namely a surface with the given fundamental form, first and second fundamental, both of them simultaneously. That will show that the whatever few equations you have written, they are enough. There will not be anything more. Okay, so this is the meaning of the independence of the relations themselves. Okay, so that's why I say uniqueness part is not very difficult, but the existence part involves solving some differential equations. Okay, so this set of relations we will see next time. Okay, what are the meaning of this one? So let me stop here today. If you have any questions, you can ask now.